it's looking at the supply chain very high up and seeing how it can be less extractive. And it's redesigning food systems. So,
Mhm.
it's actually a design problem. Like if manufacturing were designed to take up all the pieces of a vegetable, not only cut it into parts, but make broth in the same place and, package it in the same place, then you wouldn't have the same kind of waste. If we had more infrastructure, in rural areas, and small and mid-scale farmers could aggregate their produce, especially their surplus, and there was smaller scale manufacturing closer to, then
Mhm.
you would have the ability to do, what we're doing, sort of scaled through replication.
In today's episode, we speak with Anna Hammond, the founder of Matriarch Foods, a company that upcycles farm surplus and fresh cut remnants into delicious, healthy products for food service, retail, and emergency food offerings. We learn her story working in the arts to engaging local farmers in the New York City region, which led to her discovering how we can extend the full value of our crops in the current food system. We discuss skills that she brings to the table, the scale of the problem of our current agricultural industry, and how she's expanding her business to fight food waste while bringing healthy food to those in need, and changing the way that people think of upcycling food in general. Tackling food waste is a critical channel to address the climate crisis, and so the work of companies like Matriarch Foods and others are essential to immediately addressing our changing climate. Enjoy. Anna, I appreciate your time and speaking with Reaver Adventures today. I'd love to just start with you sharing a little bit about your story. Who is Anna, and what was the inspiration behind Matriarch Foods?
Who is Anna? Such a big question.
Sure.
I'll start, really, I grew up in Buffalo. My parents were amazing cooks. My mom is European. My father grew up in the Midwest from a farm family, actually, although he became a poet. So that's a little bit of my sort of ethnic background. My mom is Czech. So there's definitely like a European overlay there.
Mm-hmm.
But also, both of them grew up in sort of frugal situations. And I think that's affected my thinking a lot about, sort of how we use our resources to good end, but also always bringing beauty to them. And my dad was like an amazing cook, always with the simplest ingredients, but he always made everything just look amazing. And so, that's just kind of personal a little bit there. But I spent most of my career actually working in the art world. And I was a practicing artist for many years and exhibited all over the place, and sort of made my living, editing books and doing public art projects, and, was somewhat connected to, not even somewhat, very connected to sort of community activism
Mm-hmm.
through art. And so that's also kind of been a through line a little bit on all the jobs I've ever had. So, but anyway, fast forward many years through, museum careers and book editing and bringing public programs to uh, young people. I left that to explore a different kind of career path. And, quite late, technically, I think for people, most people, I don't know, change careers in their 20s and 30s, flop around maybe.
Yeah.
But I just decided I did not want to become a museum director and needed to do something kind of a little bit broader. So I ended up working as a speechwriter for a politician for a year, and was exploring politics as a career, sort of how to make change in some ways. And the person I worked with was amazing. And she was like, you got to run for office. And after a year working with her and sort of seeing how slowly everything worked, I just realized that wasn't the best place for me. But she got me involved right before I left, working with a group of farmers in the county where I used to live, who had been talking with her about getting a piece of legislation written to be able to use county land to grow food for the community. And the county where I used to live was Rockland County. Before the Tappan Zee Bridge was built, had over 900 farms. And then after the bridge was built, another industry came, slowly but surely those farms closed down. And so by the time we were talking to this group, there was only one farm left in the county. And so the group was that farmer owner who was, I think, fifth or sixth generation farmer, and then what I call sort of new wave farmers. So like younger people who really wanted to learn how to farm, really cared about farming from a perspective of healthy food and giving back to the community. So long story short, we got that passed. We formed the Rockland Farm Alliance, and then now there are 3 farms, operating farms in Rockland County that have CSAs that contribute to community service organizations. So learned a lot just about the challenges of farming at that time, which I knew because I have friends who are farmers, but not sort of like day-to-day challenges, really deep in the work. And that got me very interested in food and food systems and the challenges of regional farming that, of course, at the time, everyone's like, farm to table, it's a solution. I'm like, that's a really hard solution to scale. But anyway, I met someone who had just bought a farm in upstate New York. And she wanted to, she was growing food for her business, but she also wanted to bring a healthy eating program for kids onto the farm. And I'd had a lot of experience building big programs, establishing nonprofit organizations, et cetera. And I thought she had a great idea and also a lot of access to public-private partnerships and ways in which we could turn it into something really impactful. So I agreed to come on as the executive director. And after 6 years, we built that program into a healthy eating program for youth and families living in public housing in New York City. And I'm sure you know public housing in New York City is the largest public housing in the United States. Over 500,000 people live there. Many suffer from diet-related illness. Most of the public housing is in food deserts, which in New York actually is under a mile. It's not the designation that it has in the rest of the country. But like so much desire for healthy food, and these teenagers who are already like had a couple of jobs and were already cooking for their families, and might have had a parent or an uncle or someone who had a diet related illness and wanted to help them have better food and a better life. And so the combination of that experience of working with young people who wanted to make their lives and their family lives better, and then the farmers we were working with who were at the time donating some of their extra produce into the classes, and then also about the time, and this is about 10 years ago now, all the data was starting to come out, scientific data that about the impacts that food loss and waste have on the environment. And so I just thought there's a solution here, a business solution that could solve to these 3 issues. Somewhat naively, I think, as all ideas may, as all entrepreneurial ideas may start out, at least on the first one, thinking I can solve these 3 things at the same time, and and the world will be a better place. Well, in a good way, I think being naive can be good for entrepreneurship because you just believe the thing can happen and you don't know all the barriers. And so anyway, long story, that was kind of how the idea of the company came into being.
I love there's so much through line through all that. And have you always wanted to be a founder?
No.
Or entrepreneur?
I don't even think, now it's like everyone wants to start a business. Everyone, entrepreneurship is like the thing in the world. But, when I graduated from college, which is many, many years ago now, there were sort of 2 directions you could go. You could go into the nonprofit world or you could go into business. Yes, of course, academia, et cetera. But if you had a college education. And I was not interested in the way the businesses were run at the time, so it would never have occurred to me to go into business. I didn't see any social, positivity in business. It just was sort of about people making money. And, many people I knew went to Wall Street right after college and made good money, but was very soulless, and half of them lost their hair after 2 years, so that just didn't appeal very much. And also there weren't that many women in business this is, it's not that long ago, 35 years, but I think we all forget that at the time that I graduated from college, I had one friend who went to Wall Street. She was the only woman in the firm that she was
Mhm.
working in. And I remember the suit that she had to wear, and it was like this horrible, like suit with a skirt and this weird tie. And it was just
Yeah.
like, oh my God, I could never do that.
Mhm.
So anyway, that's partly why my career path never occurred to me to start a business.
Mhm.
But now, of course, social impact businesses are a thing. And so as that possibility sort of became more, sort of in the zeitgeist, I saw an opportunity to bring together all the community work that I'd done throughout my entire career
Mhm.
with a business idea that could make a social and environmental impact business successful. And in fact, all of the experience of having been and led large nonprofit programs and organizations was great background for building a business, because you have to be lean, you have to
Mhm.
know where every penny is going, you have to be very clear about what you're doing and why you're doing it, and so it wasn't on my mind to do, but I
Mhm.
saw a problem that needed to be fixed. And having had a lot of experience in philanthropy, and there's a lot of amazing work that happens in philanthropy, but it's not necessarily sustainable if you're always
Mhm.
depending on external support from a very few people to perpetuate the work you're doing. And so also starting a business seemed like a much more equitable way to do work that could last.
You mentioned, of course, your experience building these programs and your previous work within the art space has been very impactful and beneficial to starting a business. But I'm curious to know, as a founder and as a CEO, you have a certain skill set that you're bringing to the table, but it doesn't encompass everything that a business needs to have, whether it be a finance or accounting or product development within food. All these different things. What was the skill set that you explicitly brought to the table as the founder?
I think, top line clarity of vision,
Mhm.
a very strong idea with lived experience of the pain points that I wanted to address, and knowledge, pretty deep knowledge about those pain points. Um, and I think that my success in my other careers, I could attribute to, something that I don't know how to quantify or name, but I am very good at seeing all of the assets that exist in the world, whether that's people or resources, and reconfiguring them into something um, more successful than they exist in their current state. So, for example, what we do now, there's so much food out there. you know there's yes, a little bit less manufacturing than we need, and there's a need, and there are a lot of people who want to change the food system, but people tend to kind of work in silos. And I've been able to bring people together across political boundaries, social boundaries, skill boundaries, into building something that everyone agrees is better for them or the planet or their families or farmers or the environment.
Mhm.
However they hook into it, everyone's in agreement that the thing needs to happen, and have been so enthusiastic about um, being excited about the possibility of change. And so, like, I would think about that in political terms too. And I think one of the reasons I was kind of excited about the potential for running for office is that, it's the people who really are able to help others envision a better way,
Mhm.
and then can bring the right people together to make that better way, are the people we want to be around.
Mhm.
And yes, right now there's, you could say a lot of things about that, but on the positive end, of it, I think that's a kind of, it is in its own weird way an incredible skill, particularly when
Totally.
you're trying to do something that maybe really hasn't been done before, or you're trying to fix something that's a very entrenched. So having an outside perspective that brings some clarity of a path to change, is, one of the things that I brought, that I think is one of the reasons we're having the success we are. But that said, I also know very much what I don't know. And I've never been shy to say what I don't know,
Hmm.
and to
Hmm.
go find people to help or learn from, or bring them in, to to try things. I guess I'm good at convincing people to try things.
Yeah.
That's always very helpful.
Very
So,
helpful.
we've been able to, just the old fashioned way, like call people up on the phone and
Yeah.
say, hello, big factory. I know you have a lot of vegetable waste, and
Yeah.
we might have a solution that could bring you back some money that you're essentially throwing into the garbage by throwing out, 2/3 of your celery bunch
Hmm.
times 10 tons a year, and also give you a great story, and also provide healthier food for people.
Hmm.
And so at the very beginning, we were able to do some experiments at a pretty large scale that allowed us then, when we had the good, clear idea, to scale up pretty quickly.
To that point about building bridges effectively between different organizations and stakeholders and people, right? That's so important as a founder. There are areas where maybe everyone has some lacking. How did you meet your co-founder, and what made that partnership click?
Yeah, so my co-founder, is her name is Joyce Huang. We've worked together now for 15, we're going into our 16th year of working
Wow.
together. And I met her in the nonprofit I was describing before, and I put an ad in Good Food Jobs for a part-time payroll person, because the person who'd been working
This is
the person
crazy.
who'd been working for us had, was about to have a baby. She was going to go on leave, and I just needed to bring someone in to like do the basic, payroll and things. And I got a couple of incredible resumes. One from someone who used to work for the Clinton Foundation, and we're still friends because I interviewed her, and I'm like, "You're way overqualified for this," like, but still cool
Yeah.
background. And then Joyce's resume was just fascinating because she'd spent 12 years as a VP at Citigroup, in banking and small business loans, and then she left that and traveled around the world for 2 years and got a culinary degree, and then came back and started consulting with small businesses. And she was just also wanted to have like more meaning in her work. So she was very interested in the program that we were building. So she came in, 2 afternoons a week, and just did our payroll, and we got to know each other. And then as that program grew, eventually I was able to offer her a full-time job. And, I think the thing about our working relationship is, we both have very strong skills in our lanes, and we're very able to collaborate between those lanes. So,
Hmm.
I may have the big idea, but she's like, okay, let's break it down into all the components, and what is each component going to cost, and how do we, maximize our return on those costs, and where can we get a better margin, and all the things that you have to have as the background of any business. Big ideas are a dime a dozen. I mean, maybe not, but you can
Ideas
have,
that, yeah.
yeah, but if you don't have the financial acuity to make it actually work, it's very difficult to do anything with it.
Hmm.
Especially as as women-owned business owners, cash is not exactly like flowing into our coffers, and so we just were a great team in that way. And we
Amazing.
built that program out. And then I left to start this business. And she helped me during that, during that year that I was thinking about the ideas and doing the early product development and building some of the supply chain relationships. And then about a year into it, and this is so her, like she was very like cautiously like looking at what I was doing and see if it would work and, running all the models. And about a year into it, I said, yeah. And so are you going to come join me now or what? So, we spent about I don't know, a month kind of talking through what it would look like to work together.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we did that in such a way that maybe normally people are just like, oh yeah, we're going to be business partners. But again, like we just kind of took it apart. Like what would each of us do in the business? How would we divide the business? I'd already been, working under the poverty line for a year. She was definitely not going to do that. I'm like, are we at the point now where we can like at least pay ourselves a little bit of a salary and sort of
Mm-hmm.
figuring those things out?
Mm-hmm.
And then we came to just to a really good agreement, like almost like a prenup,
Yeah, it's
how
a
we
good
were going to
idea.
work together. And here we are 6 years
Mm-hmm.
later. So
Amazing. Well, to that point, I would love to understand a little bit more about that incubation period of Matriarch Foods and how you had this idea, you started to ideate on product and what this could look like and whatnot. How did you just, top line, how did you get the financing for this? Did you self-fund this? Did you get external investors?
So the first year after I left, I had a tiny bit of savings. Um, but also I had always done some consulting work, throughout the last 30 years. It's like supplementing whatever. I had three
Mm-hmm.
kids. I was a single mom. So, that 5 extra pair of pants that my youngest son was going to need because he was growing like 3 inches a minute. Um, but so I had some really good consulting clients, and I took one big consulting job that I did one day a week. And that was just, I would go into their office in the morning, very early, stay all day, work on it. It was like a big annual report. They'd never done an annual report before. So I did that for a year, and that was kind of like my base salary that just covered the bare minimum. And then also, because of that, I was living technically under the poverty line. So I
Mm-hmm.
was eligible for Medicaid, and I signed up for Medicaid, and Medicaid was great. I will, make a big plug for Medicaid because
I'm with you on
it,
that. I'm with
I
you on
do
that.
believe in the socialized medicine system because it was, you just go to a place, you get your care. The care was
Yeah.
good, and it was covered by all the taxes I've paid, for all the years I've been working.
Oh
So
yeah. Oh yeah. And mind you, what countries were you living in New York at this time?
outside of New York, yeah,
Outside of New York. Okay. And outside of
yeah,
New York City.
yeah,
Still a high
yeah.
tech state. I mean, come
Yeah,
on.
high taxes. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, so big.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of how I funded the first year, just, brass tacks piece of it. And
Yeah.
then in terms of ideation, I already knew quite a bit about on-farm food loss because I'd been working, on a farm and in the city for the previous 6 years, and had learned a lot about that and sort of supply chains. But also, I met someone who used to work for Baldor, which is, big distributor in New York of specialty grocers, and he'd been hired to, I guess, do the sustainability for that business. And they had just built a fresh cut facility inside the business. So he saw all of this food going to waste there, and he started this program called Sparks, which is scraps backward. And he was looking for entrepreneurs to figure out products that could be developed from those scraps into, edible products. And then at the same time, I was also introduced to someone at Drexel University, a guy named Jonathan Deutsch, who runs the Drexel Food Lab. And he had received a grant from the Cliniel Foundation and all like, when I look back now, it's like the amazing kind of like timing of everything. So he
Yeah.
had just gotten a $5 million grant. I think it was $5 million to support entrepreneurs who were trying to solve issues of food loss and waste through product development. And so, between those two, one was a supply chain, an additional supply chain, one was a person, with a lab, and also, some funding to support, things like nutrition facts panels and that kind of stuff. I was able to kind of build the supply chain, but with people who also knew what they were doing. And the first time I went to see a fresh cut facility, the first thing I thought is, this is just vegetable broth, like writ large. And that's kind of still what we do, certainly a couple of our, a couple of our big food service products in the ingredients line are basically, what you do in your kitchen. If you're a good home cook, you put all your scraps in the freezer, and then eventually you make a broth out of them.
Mm-hmm.
We just do that at an industrial scale now. And of course, we've developed these very, long-term contract relationships now with fresh cut facilities, where they capture their byproducts with all of the food safe compliance that's necessary for us to turn those into secondary products that we then use as both ingredients, and that we turn into products ourselves. So that's kind of fast forward through how that all happened. But some of it was just a combination of like right people, right place, right time, right idea. But as I would meet each person who could help with one part of it, the business just really took shape pretty quickly.
Right place, right time. That's an interesting comment to make. Do you feel like you created Matriarch Foods at the right time in terms of this wave of attention towards upcycling, or a wave of attention towards waste as a resource? Can you speak to sort of the macro trend of recycling in the broad scheme of things, as in this consumer market?
Yeah, I do. I think that, in all good things, there are people who've done early work, and it just was the wrong time. I mean, you can think about like every great invention. There's always the person who was the early adopter, or the early thinker, or the early developer. And then 10 years later, it takes hold. Or someone else kind of takes that. It's like, whatever, it's like a relay race. One person starts the thing, and then they hand the baton to the next person, and the next person, and there's one person crosses the finish line. But that person crossing the finish line is the result of many, many people who are passing the baton before them. And so I never talk about what we do as like our idea was the most original thing ever. I mean, people have been preserving food and using byproducts for literally thousands of years. It's only in the last 70 to 80 years that food systems have been so wasteful and so extractive. And even then, I mean, and I'm not supporting waste or extraction at all, but to talk about, what the thinking was in those days, like there was a lot of abundance, there was a feeling of abundance, and the most important thing was speed, getting food to people in far distances. If you think about, 1930s United States, there wasn't a great road system in this country even yet. So now we have roads, we have big manufacturing, we have centralized things that have become very extractive. And, I've said this now many times, but, one of the ways I like to put what we're doing is we're making efficiencies out of the inefficiencies of things that were once considered very efficient. And so, we really build on not only the challenges that the past has created, but also, other people's thinking around waste reduction and all of that. And being frugal. I mean, both, my mother was an immigrant. She came to this country, in a very nice fashion after the war, and then her family lost everything. And so, we grew up just not wasting anything. That's just how we thought about everything.
And how a lot of Americans used to think and act, back in the day, in a different era. Now it's just everything's too convenient, accessible in many ways, and it creates this, it just creates a lot of waste on every front. Well, can you speak about the misconceptions about recycling food or upcycling food as a concept? Do you think that the average consumer doesn't fully understand what that
Yeah.
means, what that looks like?
I think it's just like a stupid word thing, and it's just
Mhm,
really hard to find the right words. But if you talk about food loss or nutrition loss, instead, and utilizing food that would otherwise be lost or nutrition that would otherwise be lost, it's a very clunky way to talk about it, but it's actually more accurate than, recycling. Like recycling as a word is using something that's already been used, and that's not really what people in the upcycling space are doing. Part of it's been used and part of it hasn't been used, and it's the part that hasn't been used that's being put back into circularity.
How do I say this politely? It's not a band-aid for late stage capitalism. It's a, it's
No, it's not a band-aid, actually. It's looking at the supply chain very high up and seeing how it can be less extractive. And it's redesigning food systems. So,
mhm,
it's actually a design problem. Like if manufacturing were designed to take up all the pieces of a vegetable, not only cut it into parts, but make broth in the same place and, package it in the same place, then you wouldn't have the same kind of waste. If we had more infrastructure, in rural areas, and small and mid-scale farmers could aggregate their produce, especially their surplus, and there was smaller scale manufacturing closer to,
mhm,
then you would have the ability to do, what we're doing, sort of scaled through replication. And again, looking to the past, I mean, until the mid 1960s, in the state of Maine, there were over 60 canneries on the coast of Maine. And
mhm,
in the summer, they canned fish. And in the winter, they canned corn. And in the 60s, I think until like 1968 or 1969, Maine was the largest exporter of canned corn in the world. And imagine from an economic perspective what that looked like. So not only were they producing, for local consumption, but they were also producing a great export product that brought money into the state. And then, when foods became consolidated and big ag came in, all of that, lost out to lower prices and consolidation. Now, of course, consolidation is very convenient because it makes things less expensive in the end because you're doing everything, in one place.
mhm,
I'm not saying throw all of that out, because I do strongly believe that we need to intensify productions, but sustainably. But we also need to create kind of the ag of the middle, essentially, which is something a lot of people talk about.
mhm.
But we are not there yet in terms of supply chains, logistics, storage, and manufacturing.
Jumping into your supply chain and thinking about, the fact that your supply comes from surplus foods and remnants from large processors and manufacturers, how do you account for the vulnerability or inconsistency of that kind of supply chain? How do you really stay flexible in that into that context?
I think the thing is that you would imagine, and this is a question, and so you're not the first or the last person who's ever going to ask that question,
Hmm.
but you just can't imagine how much there is. And when you really see how much there is, you realize that consistency isn't an issue. I
Mm,
mean, imagine the grocery stores you go into where you see carrot sticks. That carrot stick looks pretty much the same for whether you're in Whole Foods or you're in, Shop and Stop or Stop and Shop or,
yeah,
Grand Union or HEB or wherever. And those carrot sticks came from also pretty much are the same. you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
So consistency isn't actually the issue. It's more sort of, how do you manufacture things that are different shapes when the
Mm,
machines have been designed for, a melon that is only this big, or, a carrot that is only, this
yeah.
long. And that's kind of where the waste happens. And again, that's why I say, so much of it is in fact a design problem.
Maybe this is a misconception about recycled foods or upcycled foods in general, is that it's sort of like hodgepodge, mixed match of whatever's left over every other month is random. But actually, because of our industrialized food systems, it's quite consistent in terms of the expected waste that comes from those manufacturing.
Yeah, and not even industrialized. I mean, we were outside of Ithaca last week because we have a grant to do some on-farm food loss measurement, and two different farms had many thousands of pounds of extra squash that had been harvested but didn't have a market, and all that squash is the same type of squash. It looks the same, it is
Mhm.
the same, it's coming from the same seed stock.
Yeah.
So there's just so much consistency actually in it. And think about it. I always ask people, like, especially I'm talking to kids, like, think about a tomato plant. If you've grown a tomato plant, that tomato usually is like, on that tomato plant, probably there are 3 tomatoes that are
Mhm.
exactly the same size. Everything else is a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, a lot bigger, a lot smaller. And out of, 30 tomatoes that might come off of one little plant, you might have, 5 that are the same size.
Mhm.
So what's inconsistent is the size, but not the quality necessarily, but it's just how you capture it, how it gets transported. Again, another thing I always ask people to think about is when you go into a grocery store and you see the cardboard flats that apples are moved in, for
Mhm.
example,
Mhm.
the scoop of where each apple is exactly the same size. What apple tree that you've ever seen had apples that were all that size? So, again, the
Yeah.
quality of the apple, fantastic, whether it's big or small. But in terms of sort of transportation and saleability, not so much.
Mhm. Mhm. The idea of working with surplus foods or food waste or whatever, um, the idea of working with food waste or surplus foods is getting some traction. I'm curious to know your experience with the investor community and how they respond to your organization and others that are focusing on this category. Is there excitement? Is there skepticism? Is there doubt? What can you speak on that?
The investment community is, I think, quite mercurial, just in general. We have an incredible group of investors. They're all impact investors. They're very interested in, like a triple bottom line. And I feel quite lucky to have brought together just a group of amazing people, from, people who have invested and made a lot of money in tech, to, people who are strategists, to farmers, to people who've had huge food businesses that have exited. So tons of knowledge there, but also a deep understanding about food and how complicated it is. So, and we also haven't raised tons and tons of money, unlike, often happens. I think food is always complicated because it's wet, and margins are very tight,
Mhm.
and so there has been, in the last 10 years, at one point there was like a massive money that was going into food companies, and then slowly but surely, you know and a lot of money that went into alternative meat, which sort of sucked a lot of the funds away from businesses that are much more kind of practical.
Mhm.
I think investors, my experience is that often investors like love a shiny thing, and not saying that there's no knowledge there, but they're like, okay, tech, there's a solution. We can fix something in 3 years, and like then we'll make a lot of money off it. But in fact, so many things that we need in this world don't have quick fixes. And so you have to have investors who understand that, and are have patience with their capital. But that said, we've brought in great investors, real financing. We've gotten very big grants through some of the programs we've been in. So we've done well there, but not like in a crazy way. And I think
Mhm.
that's kind of, one of the things I'm very proud of about our business is, we don't burn through people's cash. Um, we make very clear decisions about every penny we're spending, and we're very interested in getting a business to profitability so that it can sustain and be a real business and have
Yeah,
impact over a long period of time.
absolutely. And to the idea of impact, one thing I want to talk to you about is your different segments in your organization, right? So you have home, food service, and hunger relief. Can you speak to the evolution of these three, where you started, what was the next one, and how these product iterations have come about? Um, and also, why did you yeah why did you prioritize one over the other? I feel like a lot of new food or sustainable food brands come on board and they go straight to direct to consumer, or they prioritize going into big box retailers like Whole Foods, and that's their main deal. But you seem to take a different approach. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the reason we started this business was to make change, deep systemic change. So, with that in mind, how can you make the most impact the most quickly in a food business? So, when we looked at the different channels, of course, everyone's like, retail, it's so flashy, build a brand, but also like super expensive. And you're selling things in units, to individual consumers. And it's like massive amounts of marketing and all the rest. And sure, you can have like a great success, like, olive oil in a squeeze bottle, but like we all know that the guys who did that like had a ton of experience on like direct to consumer marketing, and they were prepared when that thing happened. It
Totally.
wasn't just like oh, we're going to do this thing and
Yeah,
hey, let's see if it
they
works.
were surgeons. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But when we looked at the issue and sort of saw the different markets, I mean, first of all, hunger is still the thing that I care about the most. And I think that, also has the potential for solving so much of this,
Mhm.
bringing food that's wasted back into the system to feed more people healthy food. But food service is where over 50% of meals are eaten in this country. And that's whether it's in school, K through 12, college and university, business and industry, prisons, elder care, um, stadiums, I mean, restaurants, QSR. So there's this huge
50%.
over 50%,
That's crazy.
51% actually.
That's crazy.
So if you think about that and you think about the quantity of food that gets consumed in those places, I just talked to someone who runs one of the cafes in Jersey City for the city, and they feed 5,000 people a day. We work with the university that does 30,000 meals a day. Um, and so when you're selling something, if you can get into that and sell one ingredient, you're going to be selling in pallets and truckloads, not individual units.
Hmm.
So what we really wanted to do is, A, kind of disrupt there and offer kinds of products that didn't exist already, but that also could, as we got traction, make impact through the volume, pure volume. And then we felt that would then, create the baseline for the business that would allow us to expand into other channels. Well, who knew that COVID was going to hit 1 week after we sold our first pallet of product to food service?
Yeah.
But
Who knew?
we, we managed to do a lot of different things in those 2 years, and we stayed true to food service, and we had a grant to work with a food bank, and we had a grant to do another project with farmers, and we developed a product for a food service company we'd been working with, who then had also had to pivot and do food boxes for frontline workers. So we created a smaller version of our concentrate for those
Mhm.
food boxes, and so we got to our first 2 years. And at the end of 2 years, COVID was still, who knew when it was going to end, and
Yeah.
food service wasn't, people weren't going back to work. And one of our advisors said, he'd worked for a big food company before, and he's like, this food company is essentially food service, even though everyone knows it as a retail brand. you should think about a retail brand as a way of kind of building up awareness of what you're doing. And I was just like, oh, retail, like
Mm,
so expensive, so hard, so, mercurial with consumers. But still, we always do what he says. and, and he's never been wrong yet.
good
And
advisor.
so I said, well, let's bring a retail product to market, but let's bring something that everyone can understand and that we have a supply chain we know we can rely on. So we had developed a supply chain of amazing Roma tomatoes with a roaster who, makes this premium roasted tomato product. And because of his machines, he kicks out about 2 to 3 million pounds a year. And so we captured those, and we were making, a food service pack product for that. So we brought three upcycled tomato sauces to market, and we
Hmm.
went to Expo East, and we got picked up by Whole Foods in the first hour of the show. And they put us in one store, and then a month later, they put us in 55 stores.
Amazing.
And so we were there in the Northeast,
Hmm.
and we've certainly had the opportunity to expand further than that, but we don't have tons of marketing dollars, and it's not where we want to. We want the,
Hmm.
the baseline of the business to grow,
Hmm.
and not sink a lot of money into marketing. But still, it has brought a lot of awareness. The product is great. People love it. People who care about climate friendly food definitely are stocking their pantries, and it's been good. So that's sort of been why, that was why we started the retail program. And I'm excited about it, and we're thinking about some other products for retail.
Hmm.
And then the emergency food was really kind of getting back to the roots of the business, and really looking at solving to the fact that food banks and emergency food providers and disaster relief purchase
Hmm.
a lot of food, and most of the food that's purchased is not coming from US farmers. It is not great quality food.
Hmm.
And so not only is it a market that is ripe for disruption, but we had developed a solution that could answer that. And so, we did a prototype during COVID with one grant we had. And then 2 years ago, we launched the first product for that market. And that's, kind of going
Hmm.
great, great guns. And we're expanding that now too.
And I'm curious about upcycling food in general. Are there any specific categories, types of foods that present the best opportunity for upcycling or easiest to upcycle relative to others?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a reason that spent grain is one of the byproducts that a lot of people are experimenting with, because there's so much beer created in this country.
Yeah.
And also because it tends to, it's in quite volume, and it's centralized. So I think I don't know if it's easy. I mean, I can't say that any of my colleagues in the upcycled space would say anything that they do is easy, but maybe it's easier because of that.
Hmm.
We're one of the few companies that really deals with vegetables, and vegetable byproducts.
Hmm.
But there's everything's possible. You just have to find sort of workarounds,
Hmm.
and sort of how do you preserve something that's very volatile, for example, like trim from vegetables. That's not going to last very long once it's cooked. Once it's cut. And so, we've devised ways of freezing against later productions and storing things, and then, but also vertically integrating with facilities that have a lot of byproducts, so it's not traveling very far.
Hmm.
Again, back to the design question, like we've just sort of figured out places where things that exist already can be redesigned for what we're doing or adapted.
Hmm.
And then we're always thinking about sort of the, processing facility of the future and what that would look like. And hopefully, in the not too distant future, we'll be building something like that.
I love it. I love it. Well, I hope for you guys to reach that level of success in the future. One last thing I'll ask you is, you are addressing a problem in our current economics, in our manufacturing of food and distribution of food, but do you have direct impact on those processors and on those manufacturers? I mean, if not to undermine your own business model, but are you making suggestions and impact on the supply of your food? in terms of regenerative practices or other types of sustainable practices in their operations?
I mean, I think in terms of operations, absolutely. And, I think we work with people who are curious and creative. I mean, people who run factories are always figuring things out. And, because things are always breaking or they want to have things be more efficient. So, people in the manufacturing sector are incredibly creative people. People always say chefs are the only answer. And, of course, like chefs are amazing and you have to, have skills and know how to bring great food, bring ingredients into, turn that into great food. But there's so many people in food systems that contribute to the creativity and advancement of what we do and our ability to eat well. So we've just only met with, kind of open arms of rethinking how they might better manage their supply internally to reduce their own waste or to be able to utilize other byproducts in different ways. And so there definitely is like a true butterfly effect, of like an actual butterfly touching you effect of we're there and we're talking about what we're trying to figure out. And then they're like, oh, that could help us in this other way. So, absolutely. Yes.
Amazing. Well, Anna, your story is really incredible, and I wish you and Matriarch only the most, only success moving forward. I look forward to going into Whole Foods soon and checking out some of your products there. But in the meantime, I thank you for your time.